It was a clear Saturday morning, the kind of day when the air smells like fresh hay and diesel, and you can hear the sound of roosters over the hum of a tractor engine. I was halfway through fixing a fence line when a dusty white SUV rolled up to the gate. I knew that SUV. Everyone in our little community did. It belonged to Karen, our self-appointed neighborhood standards enforcer, the woman who thought her suburban HOA authority somehow extended to the 5-acre farm I owned just outside their jurisdiction. I leaned against the post driver, wiped the sweat off my forehead, and thought, here we go again. She stepped out of the car wearing spotless white sneakers and a pastel tracksuit that screamed, I don't do manual labor. Her oversized sunglasses reflected my property like she was inspecting it for violations. We need to talk about your animals, she said sharply, like I'd been caught doing something indecent. I smiled and said, you mean the cows that have been here since before your subdivision was even built? That didn't go over well. She started talking about property values and nuisance smells. I pointed out, calmly, that I lived on agricultural land zoned for livestock, and she didn't. Her response was pure Karen. We'll see what the HOA thinks about that. That's when I reminded her the HOA's authority ended at the paved road, and my driveway was gravel. She pursed her lips, got back in the SUV, and sped off, throwing dust all over my boot. I figured that would be the end of it. I figured wrong. The next morning, around 8 a.m., I was feeding the chickens when two men in neon vests and matching caps rolled up in a small pickup truck with Community Standards Patrol magnetized to the side. They looked like rent-a-cops who'd lost their way. One of them got out, clipboard in hand, and asked, Are you aware of the HOA livestock restrictions, sir? I couldn't help it, I laughed. You guys realize this is county land, right? You're standing on a working farm. The second guy, a little older and clearly embarrassed, mumbled something about routine inspection. I asked for their credentials, and they froze. No badges, no county identification, nothing. Just laminated HOA IDs. You boys are a long way from your cul-de-sac, I told them. Turn that truck around before my bull decides he doesn't like your vest. They hesitated, then reversed all the way down the drive without another word. I thought that was the punchline. I hadn't yet realized Karen was about to make this personal. By midweek, I started noticing strange things. Someone had taken pictures of my barn from the road. A note was left in my mailbox saying, unauthorized structures subject to removal. Then came the drone, a tiny buzzing thing hovering over my pasture while I was baling hay. I walked straight up to it, waved, and waited until it dipped close enough for me to knock it down with a shovel. When I picked it up, I found a sticker that read HOA compliance. That was the moment I decided this was no longer funny. I called the sheriff's office. Deputy Miller, a friend of mine from high school, came out within the hour. He inspected the note and the drone, took a few photos, and laughed so hard he nearly dropped his radio. They think they can regulate a farm, he said. Let's have some fun with this. I liked the sound of that. That Friday evening, I was sitting on the porch when Karen's SUV pulled up again, this time with a small convoy of vehicles behind it, 3 more from the Community Standards Patrol. They parked in a line like they were about to raid a bootleg dairy. I could see Karen giving instructions, waving her arms like a traffic conductor. I stayed seated, just sipping my coffee. A few minutes later, they marched up the drive, Karen leading the charge with a folder in hand. We're here to conduct an official inspection, she announced, loud enough for the cows to hear. I stood up slowly. Inspection for what? Non-compliant fencing, unauthorized signage, and unapproved structures, she said. You were notified. I told her she had no authority on this land. She waved a paper in my face, some nonsense printed from the HOA bylaws. I didn't touch it. I just smiled and said, You might want to step back. She frowned. Is that a threat? Not from me, I said, from them. Right on cue, a black county truck pulled in. Out stepped 2 sheriff's deputies, Miller and his partner Torres. They walked straight up to the group, hands on their belts, calm but firm. "Afternoon, folks," Miller said. "You all the HOA patrol?" Karen looked smug, thinking they were there to back her up. "Yes, officer. We're here to enforce neighborhood standards." Miller looked at her ID, then handed it back. "Ma'am, you realize this property is not under HOA jurisdiction?" She blinked. "It's within the community boundary." "No, ma'am," he said, pointing at the gravel drive. "Your community boundary ends there. Everything beyond that is agricultural land under county authority." Karen's confidence cracked for the first time. "But the noise, the smells, are perfectly legal under farm exemption laws," Torres interrupted. "You're trespassing." Karen's face turned red. "I'll have your badges for this," she hissed. Miller smiled. "You're welcome to try, but first you're going to get back in your cars and leave this man's property." The HOA patrol hesitated, then shuffled back to their vehicles. Karen lingered, glaring at me like I'd just vandalized her manicured lawn. I waved and said, "Thanks for stopping by, neighbor." She drove off in a storm of gravel. I thought maybe, just maybe, that was the end. But I should have known Karen wasn't the type to accept defeat. That night, my phone buzzed with an anonymous text. "Enjoy your victory. It won't last." I showed it to Miller the next day. He just grinned and said, "If she calls us again, we'll send more deputies next time. Let's make sure she understands what jurisdiction really means." And sure enough, she would. Because when Karen decided to escalate, she didn't just call the HOA again. She called the county inspector, the animal control officer, and even the EPA. The thing was, she had no idea every one of them already knew me, and most of them owed me a favor. But that revelation, and how she ended up surrounded by uniformed deputies on my front lawn while holding a fake complaint letter, that came later. And by the time it did, everyone in 3 counties knew exactly who Farm Karen was. I didn't hear from Karen for almost a week, and I almost let myself believe that she'd moved on to harassing someone else, maybe some poor neighbor who hadn't trimmed their hedges to HOA regulation height. But on a bright Tuesday morning, while I was hauling feed to the lower barn, a shiny black SUV pulled up by the gate. It wasn't Karen's this time. The man who stepped out looked official, pressed khaki uniform, badge on the chest, and a clipboard under one arm. For a second, I thought maybe she'd actually succeeded in getting someone real involved. "Morning," he said politely. "I'm with County Animal Welfare. Got a complaint about neglected livestock." I almost laughed, but stopped myself. "You're welcome to take a look," I said, waving him in. He walked through the barnyard like a man expecting disaster and finding none. The animals were healthy, clean, well-fed. My water troughs were clear, the stalls raked. He checked everything twice before shaking his head. "Whoever called this in clearly hasn't been near a real farm," he said. I smirked. "Oh, she's been near. Too near." He made a note on his clipboard, promised to file the false report as harassment, and drove away looking half amused, half exhausted. I figured that would make her stop. It didn't. That evening, my cousin Jake came by to help with fencing. He's a volunteer deputy, tall and broad-shouldered, the kind of guy who looks like he eats nails for breakfast but has the patience of a saint. When I told him about the animal welfare officer, he chuckled and said, "Bet you it's the same woman who called about my roosters last spring." Turns out, Karen had complained that his crowing disturbed her peaceful evenings, even though his place was 2 miles from her subdivision. I told him I was starting to think she had a map of rural properties pinned up in her kitchen with red string connecting us all. Jake leaned on the post driver and said, "Let her call whoever she wants. The more she tries, the worse she looks. But if she steps foot on your property again, we'll handle it by the book." That sounded fine to me. I wasn't looking for trouble. But trouble wasn't done looking for me. The next day, while I was on my tractor mowing the backfield, I spotted movement by the fence line. 2 people, wearing safety vests, pointing cameras at my property. One was crouched low like they were photographing a crime scene. I killed the engine and waved them over. They froze, whispering to each other. When I started walking their way, they bolted for their car, a white sedan with temporary tags. I managed to get a good look at the passenger, a woman with short blonde hair and oversized sunglasses. Karen. I didn't chase them. I just took my phone out, zoomed in, and got a picture of her license plate as they sped off. I sent it straight to Miller. 10 minutes later, he called back laughing. She really doesn't know when to quit, does she? I'll swing by later. By evening, Miller was on my porch, sipping coffee while I grilled steaks. He told me he'd run the tag. It was registered to Karen's husband. I'm writing this one up as harassment and trespassing, he said. We can issue a warning first, but if she comes back with her fake patrol, it becomes a criminal matter. I nodded, grateful but still irritated. It wasn't that I was scared of her. It was the principle of it. I worked hard for this land. My grandfather bought it in the 60s, and we'd kept it in the family through droughts, floods, and more than one developer trying to buy us out. To have some HOA queenpin waltz in and act like she owned it was infuriating. You know what gets me? I said, flipping the steak. She doesn't even want anything from me. She just wants to control something she can't. Miller grinned. That's the Karen mindset right there. The next morning, I got my first letter. It was printed on fake letterhead. HOA Enforcement Division. It claimed I was in violation for unauthorized fencing materials and unlicensed livestock operations. There was even a fine of $500 due within 30 days, payable to neighborhood compliance. I almost fell out of my chair laughing. She'd actually drafted a fake fine notice. I called Miller again, sent him a photo. He said, "Keep every single thing she sends. We're building a file now." I put the letter in a folder labeled Karen's Greatest Hits. I didn't respond to it. Instead, I put up a new sign on my gate the next day. Private property. Trespassers will be fed to the pigs. That probably wasn't the most diplomatic move, but it made me smile. 2 days later, around lunchtime, I heard the unmistakable sound of tires crunching gravel. I looked out the window and saw not one, but 3 cars pulling up. In the lead, Karen, of course. Behind her, a silver sedan and a pickup with flashing yellow lights. This time, she'd brought reinforcements. They marched up the driveway like a parade of misplaced authority. I stepped out on the porch, hands in pockets, and waited. Karen's smile was wide, practiced, and poisonous. "We're here for an inspection," she announced. Under HOA Statute 4.3, properties must maintain visual harmony with the community aesthetic. I stared at her. "You realize this is farmland, right? The only aesthetic here is dirt." The 2 men with her, one holding a tablet, the other taking photos, looked uncertain. "Ma'am," I said, "do you have a warrant or county authorization?" Karen lifted her chin. "We have HOA authority." That was my cue. I called over my shoulder, "Hey Jake, you might want to come out here." A moment later, Jake stepped from the barn, his deputy badge visible on his vest. The 2 men stiffened immediately. "Afternoon, folks," he said in a slow, steady tone that made people stop talking. "You're trespassing on private agricultural land. Care to explain why you're here?" Karen's smugness flickered, but she rallied. "This man's property is a nuisance. We've had multiple complaints." Jake smiled faintly. "Ma'am, do you represent any law enforcement agency?" "I represent the Homeowners Association," she said proudly. "Then you'll understand this," he replied. "You have 10 seconds to get off this property before I file an official trespass charge." That's when the standoff began. Karen crossed her arms and refused to move. "We're not leaving until we've documented the violations," she snapped. Jake pulled out his phone, took a picture of her, and said, "Smile for the evidence record." The 2 men exchanged nervous glances. One whispered something, and a moment later, they turned back toward their cars. Karen stayed frozen, trembling with outrage. "This isn't over," she hissed, pointing a manicured finger at me. I shrugged. "It never is." Then Jake added, Next time, don't bring civilians onto private property pretending to be law enforcement. That's impersonation." She blanched, then stormed off, her convoy following in a cloud of dust. That night, I got a call from Miller again. "Heard about the afternoon entertainment," he said, clearly grinning. "Jake sent me the pictures. We're filing the trespass warning now. If she or any of her fake patrol shows up again, it's an arrest." I thanked him and leaned back on the porch, listening to the crickets. For the first time in a while, I felt calm. But as it turned out, Karen wasn't finished escalating, she was just warming up. The very next day, a letter arrived by certified mail, this one with a county seal on the envelope. For a split second, I thought maybe she'd finally gotten someone legitimate to listen to her. I opened it carefully, and burst out laughing when I saw what was inside. The seal was photocopied, and the inspector's name was spelled wrong. It was another fake. Karen had printed a bogus county order declaring my farm temporarily suspended pending review. I sent it straight to Miller, who said, "This just went from funny to felony." He called the county attorney that same day. I didn't know it yet, but that forged letter would become the key piece of evidence in the case that finally took Karen down. Because when someone like her gets desperate enough to fake government documents, the law doesn't just shrug it off. They come knocking. And when they did, she made the mistake of calling the HOA patrol again. Except this time, they weren't the ones who showed up first. My deputies were. By Thursday morning, word had already spread around town. Small towns have a way of turning other people's drama into public sport, and Karen had unintentionally become our main event. The clerk at the feed store asked if I'd heard about the lady with the fake badges, and the postmaster joked that my mailbox should charge her rent for all the nonsense she kept sending. I tried to ignore it and focus on my work, but it was getting harder to stay patient. That morning, as I was fixing the south fence, I heard the buzz of an engine on the road and looked up to see a county truck. This time, a real one, pull into the drive. My first thought was that maybe Karen's nonsense had somehow reached the county offices. A young inspector stepped out, friendly enough but clearly nervous. "Sir, we received a report about potential runoff issues from your property," he said, flipping through his clipboard. I sighed. "Let me guess. Complaint came from someone in the Willow Creek HOA?" He looked up, surprised. "Actually, yeah. How'd you know?" I pointed toward the subdivision's direction. "Because she's been at it for weeks." He looked almost apologetic. "We still have to check, sir. Mind if I take a look around?" I didn't mind. I walked him down to the lower field where the drainage ditch ran clean and clear, the grass cut short, no signs of contamination. He took photos, scribbled notes, and finally shook his head. "Everything's up to code. Honestly, whoever called this in doesn't understand how irrigation works." I smiled. That would be Karen. By now I had a full collection of her attempts. Fake letters, fake inspections, and enough drone footage to start a nature documentary. Miller had been documenting everything, but even he seemed amazed at her persistence. "Most people quit after one warning," he said over the phone that evening. "She's either obsessed or delusional." I said, "Maybe both." Still, I had to admit a small part of me found it entertaining. Her attempts were so ridiculous they almost felt like a challenge. She wanted to play power games. I preferred patience and paperwork. Because out here, it's not who yells the loudest. It's who keeps their record straight when the sheriff asks questions. A few days later, Karen changed tactics. No more fake letters or drone flyovers. This time, she went after my reputation. The local community Facebook page blew up with posts about unsafe farming practices and illegal livestock operations. The posts came from accounts with generic names and stock profile pictures, but the writing style was all Karen, passive-aggressive and overly formal. One post even claimed I was endangering neighborhood pets by storing chemicals near the fence. I read it, laughed, then commented under it using my real name. "Those chemicals are bags of fertilizer, Karen. They're labeled. You're welcome to read the label if you can get past the "No Trespassing" sign. Within an hour, the post was deleted, but screenshots were already circulating. People started messaging me privately. Neighbors, farmers, even a few folks from her own HOA, saying they were tired of her antics. I didn't reply to most, but I saved every message. Then came Saturday morning. I woke up to the sound of horns and engines near my front gate. I stepped outside, still half asleep, and saw 5 vehicles lined up. 3 SUVs, a sedan, and a small trailer with a sign that read Community Standards Enforcement. It looked like a parade of misplaced authority again. Karen stood proudly at the front, clipboard in hand, wearing a reflective vest like she was directing traffic. I could see phones recording, her little audience ready to witness whatever victory she thought she was about to score. I walked down to the gate, calm as ever. "Morning," I said, "didn't realize we were hosting a parade today." She ignored the joke and announced, "We are conducting an official neighborhood compliance review. You are required to allow entry." I crossed my arms. "Required by who?" "You? The HOA that doesn't exist out here." She smiled coldly. "We've coordinated with county authorities this time." That's when I noticed the second truck pulling in behind them, a real county vehicle, but not the same inspector from before. This one had 2 uniformed deputies inside. My stomach dropped for half a second, but then I recognized one of them. It was Miller. He stepped out slowly, sunglasses on, posture relaxed. "Morning, Karen," he said cheerfully. She blinked, clearly not expecting to hear her name from him. "Officer, I'm glad you're here. We need your assistance enforcing local codes." Miller raised an eyebrow. "Funny, because I'm here responding to a trespass complaint. Filed by him." He pointed at me. Her face fell. "That's absurd. We're here on business." "Fake business," Miller said, walking toward her SUV. "Mind if I see your enforcement credentials again?" Karen hesitated, clutching her clipboard tighter. "We don't have to show you anything." Miller smiled thinly. "That's what I thought." He nodded to his partner, who started taking photos of her group, their vehicles, and the ridiculous community standards sign on the trailer. "You understand that impersonating a county official is a serious crime, right?" he asked. Karen stammered something about private enforcement rights, but the words didn't even make sense. Her so-called patrol began backing toward their cars, suddenly less confident. Miller turned to me. "You want them formally trespassed this time?" "Yep," I said. "Let's make it official." Miller read the warning out loud, recorded the whole thing, and handed Karen a copy signed by both deputies. "Next time you set foot on this property, it's jail time," he said flatly. Karen's lips trembled, but she tried to save face. "You'll regret this," she snapped. "This community deserves order." Miller chuckled. "It's got order. It just doesn't need you to provide it." After they left, he lingered for a bit, leaning against his truck, laughing quietly. "You know," he said, "we're starting to get calls from her own HOA board. Turns out they've had enough too. She's been filing complaints against her neighbors for things like mismatched mailbox colors." I shook my head. "She's gonna implode eventually." He grinned. "She's already halfway there." But I underestimated how far Karen was willing to go. Because the next twist didn't come from her in person. It came from a letter from the Environmental Protection Agency, this time real. A legitimate agency envelope, official contact information, and a request for site access due to reported chemical runoff into residential drainage. My first thought was that Karen must have filed a complaint directly with them. I called the number listed, spoke with the field coordinator, and confirmed that yes, an anonymous report had come in alleging I was dumping waste into a public waterway. My jaw tightened, but I stayed polite. "You're welcome to inspect anytime," I said. They came 2 days later. 2 agents, professional, courteous, and actually competent. They tested the water, walked the property, and by the time they were done, they were shaking their heads. "Everything's fine," one of them said. Actually cleaner than most properties we inspect. I told them about Karen and her crusade. They exchanged a look, then one said quietly, "You're not the first person to mention her name. We've had a few reports from this area, all bogus." I wasn't surprised. They promised to close the case, but I could tell they were filing something more permanent. False reports to a federal agency don't go unnoticed. That night, I sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the fields gold. For a few minutes, it almost felt peaceful again. The cows were grazing, the dogs stretched out by my feet, and the world was quiet except for crickets. Then my phone buzzed, an unknown number. I answered, expecting another officer or maybe a friend calling to tease me about the day's excitement. Instead, I heard Karen's voice, clipped and trembling. "You think you've won?" she hissed. "You're just making it worse for yourself. People are watching you." Then the line went dead. I didn't bother calling back. I just took a screenshot of the call log and sent it to Miller. His reply was immediate. "Keep every record. She's unraveling." The next morning, the unraveling became public. Someone had leaked the footage of her confrontation with the deputies to the local Facebook group. The video showed her screaming about authority, while Miller calmly explained trespass laws. It went viral locally within hours. The comments were brutal. People she used to boss around in HOA meetings mocked her, called her Sheriff Karen, and posted memes of her in fake uniforms. Even her own HOA president commented, saying, "The board does not condone this behavior." For the first time since this started, she was the one on defense. That should have been the end. But people like Karen don't stop when they're embarrassed. They double down. She stopped pretending to be professional and started getting desperate. That same week, someone slashed my mailbox with a knife, leaving the same fake letter inside, now smeared with mud. I didn't even flinch. I just took pictures, called Miller, and said, "You ready for the finale?" He laughed. "Oh yeah. The county attorney's already drafting something. She doesn't know it yet, but next time she sets foot near this property, she's getting the full treatment." And I had a feeling that next time was coming soon, because humiliation wasn't the kind of wound Karen could leave alone. It was the kind that made her pick up the phone, rally her little patrol, and convince herself she was still in control. But this time, the people waiting for her wouldn't be farmhands or deputies she could argue with. They'd be the Rayall County investigators. And the moment she crossed that gravel line again, she was going to find out what jurisdiction really meant. By the time the next week rolled around, the whole county was talking about her. People at the diner swapped stories about that HOA lady who called the cops on a farmer, and the local radio host even mentioned her during the morning segment, calling it the most ridiculous feud in Willow Creek history. It would have been funny if it weren't happening to me. Still, I tried to get back to normal. Tractor maintenance, feeding schedules, fixing fences, but I could feel something brewing. Karen wasn't the type to slink away in humiliation. She was the type to come back swinging. And sure enough, she did. It started on a foggy Wednesday morning. I woke to the sound of my dogs barking like the world was ending. When I looked out the window, I saw lights, flashlights, moving along the edge of my property. At first, I thought maybe it was the sheriff's department checking something, but then I noticed the shape of the people, 5 of them in matching reflective vests again, milling around my fence line. And right in the middle, standing a bit taller, was Karen. She was pointing at things, barking orders, holding her clipboard like it was a sword. My pulse spiked. This time she hadn't come to talk. She was trespassing in the middle of the night. I threw on a jacket, grabbed my phone, and started recording as I walked down the drive. The gravel crunched loud under my boot. When my flashlight beam hit them, 2 of the men froze like deer in headlights. "Morning," I called out, voice calm but sharp. "You folks lost again?" Karen spun around, startled, then tried to regain her composure. "We're conducting an emergency safety assessment," she said stiffly. "You've been reported for improper chemical storage. We have the right to document evidence." I stared at her, almost laughing. At 3 in the morning? Safety doesn't have a schedule, she snapped. I held up my phone, panning across the group. Smile. You're being recorded for the sheriff. That did it. Two of the men bolted immediately, sprinting toward the parked vehicles near the road. Karen stood her ground, shaking but defiant. You can't threaten us, she yelled. I said quietly, Karen, I'm not threatening you. I'm documenting a crime. She blustered something about her legal right of oversight, but I wasn't listening. My dogs had come up behind me now, big farm shepherds, tails low, growls rumbling in their throats. They didn't attack, just stood there like sentinels. You should leave, I told her. Right now. She muttered something and backed away, disappearing into the fog with her remaining companion. The sound of tires screeching followed. By the time the sun came up, Miller was at my kitchen table, drinking coffee and watching the video I'd recorded. He didn't say much at first, just sighed and rubbed his temples. She's gone completely off the rails, he muttered. You said this happened at 3 a.m.? I nodded. She claimed she was doing a safety inspection. He shook his head. We're past warnings now. I'm getting a warrant for harassment and criminal trespass. Maybe even stalking. I didn't say anything for a moment. Part of me was relieved, but another part was tired. You think that'll stop her? I asked. Miller looked at me over the rim of his mug. It'll stop her when she's sitting in a holding cell. The paperwork started that afternoon. Miller took statements, collected screenshots of every fake letter and call log, and even interviewed a few of my neighbors who'd been harassed by her too. By evening, the case file was thick enough to break a binder. He told me the county attorney wanted to meet the next morning. We're not just doing this for you, Miller said. She's been messing with half the town. You're just the one who kept records. That made me grin a little. Guess being petty finally pays off. The next day, I drove to the courthouse in town. The county attorney, a practical woman named Reynolds, looked like she'd been reading Karen's file all night. I've dealt with plenty of HOA complaints, she said, but this is the first time I've seen someone forge county documents and impersonate inspectors. She tapped the fake EPA notice with her pen. That alone could get her probation and fines. The rest? Possibly misdemeanor charges. She leaned back in her chair. We'll file the paperwork, but be ready, she won't go quietly. I nodded. She never does. By Friday afternoon, the sheriff's office had the warrant ready. They decided to serve it early Saturday morning, when she was least likely to be surrounded by her so-called patrol. Miller called me that night. We've got everything lined up, he said. We're executing at dawn. You might want to keep your phone close. I slept restlessly that night, not because I was afraid, but because I couldn't believe how far things had gone, from fence complaints to criminal charges. All because one woman couldn't stand the sight of cows on the horizon. At 6:30 a.m., Miller texted me, "She's in custody." I stared at the screen for a long time before replying, "Already?" She resisted. He wrote back, "Of course." I called him an hour later. He told me how it happened, how they'd pulled up to her house with a warrant, how she'd tried to shut the door, yelling that they had no authority over the HOA, and how that phrase alone made the entire team laugh later. They'd taken her in without incident after that. She wasn't violent, just furious, shouting about harassment and rights. Miller said she spent half the drive to the station threatening to sue the county. I figured that was the end of it, but by lunchtime, the story had already leaked. Someone from her HOA board must have talked, because the local news picked it up. Willow Creek HOA member arrested for impersonating officials. They didn't name her outright, but everyone knew who it was. The comments section went wild. People shared their own encounters with her, harassing landscapers, yelling at delivery drivers, calling the cops over fence heights. It was like a public reckoning. Her name became shorthand for entitlement. That evening, I drove into town for supplies. At the gas station, two old farmers clapped me on the back and said, "Heard your HOA sheriff finally got deputized by reality." I laughed but didn't say much. I wasn't trying to gloat. Deep down, I felt a strange mix of satisfaction and pity. She'd built her whole identity around control, and now the very system she worshipped had turned on her. But, of course, this story wasn't done. A week later, Karen was out on bail. The charges were still pending, but she was back in the neighborhood, quieter but not beaten. I didn't see her at first, but others did, sitting in her SUV at the edge of the road, taking photos, talking to reporters. Then one day, she showed up again. It was early evening, golden light spilling across the pasture. I was on the porch, drinking coffee, when her SUV rolled to a stop outside the gate. She didn't get out, just rolled down the window and called, "Happy now?" I didn't answer. I just stood there, letting her fill the silence. "You ruined my reputation," she shouted. "Do you have any idea what that's like? My neighbors won't even talk to me. My husband's furious. I was trying to protect this community." I stayed calm. "Karen, you tried to control people who didn't belong to you. That's not protection. That's obsession." Her hands tightened on the steering wheel. "You'll regret this," she whispered, then sped off. I thought it was another empty threat. I was wrong again. That night, just past midnight, I woke to the faint smell of smoke. I bolted upright, ran outside, and saw the glow, one of my hay bales burning near the north fence. It wasn't big yet, but flames were climbing fast. I grabbed the hose, shouting for my dogs. They barked, circling, while I sprayed water until the fire hissed out. It didn't take long to put out, but the cause was clear. A trail of lighter fluid led from the fence to the bale. Someone had tried to start it deliberately. I called Miller right away. He showed up 20 minutes later, flashlight sweeping the ground. He found footprints, tire tracks by the roadside, small, fresh, SUV-sized. He didn't say the name, but we both knew who it was. "She's crossed into felony territory now," he said grimly. The next morning, he brought in investigators. They took samples, measured tracks, and confirmed the obvious: arson attempt. When they matched the tire treads to Karen's vehicle later that day, Miller called me with the news. "We're rearresting her," he said. "This time, she won't be home for dinner." I stood by the porch rail that evening, staring at the blackened patch near the fence, the smell of burnt hay still lingering. The irony hit me hard. She'd called the HOA patrol, the county, the EPA. She'd tried every authority she could find to control me. And now, the only people she couldn't control were the ones walking her to a jail cell. But even then, as satisfying as that thought was, I couldn't quite celebrate. Because I knew someone like Karen never truly disappears. They just wait, fester, and find another way to claw back a sense of power. I didn't know what form it would take next, but the look in her eyes that last day told me it wasn't over. And when the next chapter of her downfall arrived, it would drag the whole HOA with it. Karen's second arrest sent shockwaves through Willow Creek. For the first time, the HOA board actually issued a public statement distancing themselves from her, something no one thought they'd ever do. The letter went out to every resident. The actions of former board member Karen D. do not reflect the values or authority of the Willow Creek Homeowners Association. Former. That word said everything. She'd been voted out in an emergency session less than 24 hours after the arson charge. You'd think that would have ended things once and for all, but it didn't. For Karen, losing control was like oxygen being cut off. And when people like her can't control others, they try to destroy them instead. Miller called me 2 days after her arrest. "She's posting bail again," he said flatly. "Don't panic, but we're putting extra patrols on your road for a few nights." I sighed. "She's really that stubborn?" He chuckled humorlessly. "You have no idea. She's filing countersuits, claiming harassment, abuse of power, the works. The county attorney's laughing, but it'll still take time to process." I thanked him and hung up, but the unease lingered. I wasn't scared, exactly. I'd handled worse storms, literally and figuratively. But this was different. Karen wasn't fighting for money or justice. She was fighting to feel superior again, and that made her dangerous. The next morning, I woke up to find my property line covered in signs. Bright red plastic boards staked every 10 feet, all reading things like contaminated area and under investigation. I stared at them for a long minute before bursting out laughing. She must have done it in the middle of the night, sneaking along the fence line like some deranged environmental vigilante. I didn't bother pulling them all down immediately. Instead, I called Miller again. He showed up with 2 other deputies, one of whom was new and looked completely bewildered. "You weren't kidding," the young one said, staring at the line of signs. Miller smirked. "You learn fast around here. Never underestimate the creativity of crazy." We took photos, bagged a few of the signs as evidence, and they left to file an updated report. But the strangest part was that even as ridiculous as it was, the situation had started to take a toll on me. Every time a car slowed on the road, I wondered if it was her. Every time the dogs barked at night, I grabbed the flashlight just in case. My friends teased me, calling it farm wars. But when you live alone on a few acres surrounded by open land, paranoia starts to seep in like fog. Still, I kept working. Harvest season was coming, and crops don't care about drama. Then came the news story. A local TV station ran a piece titled, "HOA Harassment or Rural Retaliation?" featuring interviews with anonymous community members complaining about unsafe farming practices. It was obvious Karen had fed them the story before she got arrested. The footage showed slow drone shots of my property, footage she'd likely filmed weeks earlier, and snippets of neighbors saying they'd heard rumors about livestock violations. I watched the whole thing in silence, then replayed it once more just to make sure I wasn't imagining it. She'd managed to turn her meltdown into a media circus. Miller called again that evening. "Saw the segment?" he asked. "Yeah," I said. "She's persistent, I'll give her that." He sighed. "She's spinning it as retaliation, saying you and I fabricated evidence against her. It's nonsense, but the station loves drama." "Can we do anything?" I asked. "We can," he replied. "You can too. Ever think about telling your side?" I hadn't, but the idea stuck. Not to go public for revenge, but to set the record straight. I called the station the next morning and asked to speak to the producer. When I told them my name, there was a pause, then a curious, "Oh, you're him." I explained everything calmly, emailed copies of official documents, police reports, timestamps, and even the video footage of her trespassing at 3 a.m. The next day, they called back and said they'd like to run a follow-up piece. It aired that Friday. The headline was short and devastating. HOA harasser exposed. Fake patrols, forged documents, and midnight trespassing. They played my footage, the sheriff's statement, and interviews with other residents who'd been harassed by her too. Watching it felt surreal. There she was on screen, waving her clipboard, yelling about authority, completely unaware she was filming her own downfall. The story spread fast. Within 2 days, her name was trending locally. Memes, jokes, even a country song someone posted online. Karen took her HOA too far. The fallout was immediate. Her husband filed for separation, her house went up for sale, and she disappeared from the neighborhood. For the first time in months, the road by my property was quiet. No more headlights at night, no more fake patrols, no more signs. Just peace. For a while. 2 weeks later, I got a call from Reynolds, the county attorney. "We've finalized the charges," she said. "Forgery, trespassing, harassment, false reports, attempted arson. We're recommending probation and community service, possibly restitution." I nodded, listening. "Restitution? For property damage and legal costs," she said. "You'll get a formal notice soon." I thanked her, hung up, and leaned back in my chair, staring out across the pasture. It was almost over. Almost. That same evening, a package arrived at my gate. No return address, just my name printed in block letters. I took it to the porch and opened it carefully. Inside was a stack of papers, photocopies of old HOA newsletters, meeting minutes, and one handwritten note on pink stationery that said, "They betrayed me. You'll see." I stared at it, then at the signature scrawled below. Karen. I didn't know whether to laugh or be concerned. She was gone, but she clearly wasn't finished trying to drag everyone else down. I handed it over to Miller the next morning. He flipped through the papers and said, "Looks like she's turning on her old allies. She's accusing half the HOA board of illegal spending." "So she's burning her own house now," I said. "Figuratively and literally." He chuckled. "Guess she doesn't know when to quit." But this time, her obsession turned inward. Instead of targeting me, she went after her own community. Leaked emails started circulating, messages between HOA members talking about fines, landscaping contracts, even hush money payments to silence complaints. Most of it traced back to documents Karen had sent anonymously. She might have been unhinged, but she wasn't lying about everything. Within a month, 2 board members resigned and a county audit was opened. Willow Creek, once the pride of suburban perfection, was suddenly a scandal-ridden mess. People started calling me the guy who survived the HOA war. The same station that aired the story before reached out again, asking for a follow-up interview. I agreed, mostly because I wanted to make one thing clear. This was never about revenge, I told the camera. It was about someone who thought rules made them invincible. Turns out, the law doesn't work that way. It wasn't poetic, but it felt right. After the interview, life finally began to quiet down. The new HOA board was too busy cleaning up the mess to bother anyone outside their walls. My name was cleared, my property safe, and Miller finally stopped calling with new reports. For a while, it felt like a strange kind of victory. Quiet, satisfying, maybe even peaceful. But deep down, I knew Karen wasn't done for good. People like her never really disappear. They just retreat, lick their wounds, and wait for another chance to rise again. And I was right. 3 months later, the sheriff's office got a tip from a nearby county. A woman matching Karen's description had been spotted running community compliance workshops under a new name. She'd started a small consulting business offering to train HOAs in proper enforcement. It would have been funny if it weren't so predictable. Miller called me laughing so hard he could barely breathe. "She's franchising her insanity," he said. "Guess she found a new audience." I just shook my head. Some people never learn. But here's the kicker. Her new little operation didn't last long either. Turns out, one of her new clients looked her up and found the old news stories. They forwarded them to the local paper, and within a week, her business shut down. The county attorney called it poetic justice. I called it inevitable. Now, when I look out over my land, the fence repaired, the hay stacked, and the signs long gone, I sometimes think about how absurd it all was. How one person's obsession with control turned into a county-wide circus. But I also think about what it revealed, how fragile authority becomes when it's built on ego instead of sense. I never wanted a feud, but maybe the whole thing had to happen for the rest of us to see how ridiculous it all was. Karen's name still pops up now and then, someone claiming they saw her at a new development, trying to run a neighborhood beautification committee somewhere downstate. If that's true, I wish those folks luck. They're gonna need it. As for me, I've learned that peace isn't just quiet, it's earned. It's the sound of nothing but wind through the fields and cows chewing grass, no clipboards, no fake patrols, no HOA rules creeping past the gravel line. Just freedom. And if anyone ever tries to cross that line again, well, let's just say the deputies know exactly where to find my farm. By the time spring rolled around, it had been nearly half a year since the last time I saw or heard from Karen directly. The quiet was unsettling at first, like the pause before a summer storm. The farm had gone back to its rhythm, the sound of the windmill turning, the steady moo of the cows, the hum of the tractor in the fields. Most days, I forgot about her entirely. The locals still brought her up sometimes, usually as a joke. At the diner, people would say things like, "Careful, or the HOA will show up with a clipboard," and everyone would laugh. It became our county's favorite cautionary tale about what happens when you try to turn farmland into suburbia. But I never really stopped watching the road. Some part of me expected her SUV to appear again, kicking up dust, headlights flashing like a bad dream that refused to end. Then, one morning in early April, a black sedan pulled up to my gate. It wasn't Karen's car, and for a moment, I thought it might be another county inspector. Instead, a man in a gray suit stepped out, holding a briefcase and a polite smile. "Mr. Collins?" he asked. "I'm representing Ms. Davenport." I froze for half a second. Karen. She'd actually found a lawyer brave enough to speak her name aloud. "What does she want now?" I asked. "She's filed a civil suit for defamation and emotional distress," he said, handing me a manila envelope. I took it, opened it on the tailgate of my truck, and skimmed through it. Most of it was the same delusional narrative, claims that I'd conspired with the sheriff's department to ruin her reputation, that the video I'd released was edited to defame her, and that I'd incited public ridicule. I looked up at him and asked dryly, "You read this?" He hesitated. "I did." "And you still took the case?" He smiled awkwardly. "She's persuasive." I didn't get angry. I didn't even call Miller this time. I just handed the papers over to Reynolds, the county attorney who'd helped handle the earlier mess. She read the file, sighed, and said, "We'll handle it. Don't lose sleep over this." A few weeks later, her office filed a motion to dismiss, citing lack of evidence and prior convictions of the plaintiff. The judge threw it out before the first hearing. But that wasn't the end of it. Karen had found a new way to make noise. She started writing letters, to local newspapers, to state offices, even to talk radio shows, painting herself as a victim of rural corruption. None of them gained traction, but every now and then someone would forward one to me with a note that said, "Your favorite neighbor's at it again." By summer, she'd vanished again, reportedly moving out of state. Her house sold for less than market value. Rumor was that her husband finalized the divorce and left her with the mortgage. The new owners were a young couple from the city who'd heard the gossip but bought it anyway. When I met them one afternoon as they were unpacking, the wife laughed nervously and said, "We heard there used to be some kind of situation?" I smiled. Let's just say the previous owner was enthusiastic about community management. They both laughed, though I could see the hint of unease in their eyes. I told them the truth. "You'll be fine. The worst storm's already passed." For a while, I believed that myself. The new season brought good rains, fat calves, and the kind of peaceful monotony I'd been craving. I rebuilt the fence line Karen had destroyed with her signs, repainted the barn, even hosted a small barbecue for neighbors and friends to celebrate the end of harvest. It felt right, like the farm was reclaiming its dignity. As the sun set that night, turning the fields gold, Miller showed up with his wife and a six-pack. He leaned against the porch rail, watching the cows graze. "Hard to believe this used to be ground zero for HOA insanity," he said. I chuckled. "Yeah, I almost missed the excitement." He grinned. "Careful what you wish for." It was around that same time that the final twist hit. A letter, not from Karen this time, but from the state auditor's office. Apparently, her old HOA's finances were being formally investigated after multiple anonymous tips, most of which traced back to documents she'd leaked before her downfall. The irony was staggering. Even in self-destruction, Karen had managed to expose the corruption she once helped create. Several board members were fined for misappropriation of funds. The story made regional headlines, and once again, her name resurfaced. Not as the villain this time, but as an accidental whistleblower. The public, of course, didn't care about the nuance. To them, she was still the crazy woman who tried to enforce HOA rules on a farm. A few months later, I got a call from an unknown number while I was out in the pasture. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity got the better of me. It was her. Her voice was quieter now, hoarse, but unmistakable. "You got what you wanted," she said. "They're all ruined." I stayed silent. I thought if I made people follow the rules, things would stay perfect. "But it never works that way, does it?" she said softly. "You can't make people behave. You can't control chaos." There was a long pause. I could hear wind on the other end, maybe from a car window. "I lost everything," she whispered. "House, friends, even my own son doesn't speak to me. You must be happy." I let out a slow breath. "Karen, I don't hate you. I never did. But you made your choices." She laughed bitterly. "Choices? Yeah. That's what they always say." Then the line went dead. I never heard from her again. Miller ran a trace afterward, just in case. The call came from a prepaid phone registered in another state. No forwarding address, no record. She'd disappeared completely. Some said she moved to Arizona, others said she joined some kind of property rights advocacy group. I stopped asking. Sometimes people self-destruct so completely that chasing them just feels cruel. Over the next year, life went on. The farm flourished. I built a new pond, planted windbreak trees along the road, and got into selling organic feed. The neighbors were kinder too. The whole ordeal had reminded everyone that rural life works best when folks mind their own business and help when needed. Even the HOA, what was left of it, kept to themselves, quieter and humbler than before. Once in a while, when I drove past the old Willow Creek sign, I'd notice someone had spray-painted, "No Karens Allowed," across the bottom. It made me laugh every time. But one evening in late autumn, as I was closing the barn, I noticed something strange. Near the mailbox, half buried in the dirt, was a small envelope. No stamp, no address, just my name. Inside was a single sheet of paper with handwriting I recognized immediately. It said, "I understand now. The rules don't matter when you've already lost everything." I stood there for a long time, the sunset bleeding into darkness behind me. I didn't know if it was closure or just another echo from someone who couldn't let go. I burned the letter in the fire pit that night, watched it curl and turn to ash. After that, I didn't think of her much. Life has a way of sanding down even the sharpest memories until they just become stories you tell at dinner. Sometimes, when new folks move into town, someone will bring her up, and I'll smile and say, "That's just the legend of Farm Karen." They laugh, not realizing how close that story came to becoming something worse. In the end, she didn't win, but I didn't exactly celebrate either. The truth is, there's no victory in watching someone unravel, there's just relief that you survived it. Karen taught me something I never expected to learn from a feud, that control is an illusion, and that sometimes the best revenge is just continuing to live peacefully while your enemies fall apart trying to control the world around them. On the first warm evening of the next spring, I sat on my porch with a glass of tea, the dogs at my feet, and the sound of crickets rising from the field. The air smelled of cut grass and diesel, the familiar comfort of work well done. I thought about everything that had happened, the fake patrols, the letters, the fire, the arrests, and felt a strange gratitude. It had been chaos, sure, but it had also reminded everyone around here that rural folk might be quiet, but we're not pushovers. We mind our own business until someone forces us not to. And when that happens, we don't yell or panic. We document, wait, and let the law do the talking. So, when people ask me now what really happened with Karen, I tell them the truth in the simplest way possible. I say, she called the HOA patrol to my farm, but they met my deputies instead. And after that, she learned the hard way that authority doesn't mean anything when you're standing on someone else's land. Then I raise my glass, look out at the fields that outlasted her tantrums, and smile. Because in the end she left, but the land stayed, and so did I.